Rin, do you think we can start the session or shall we wait a bit?
I think we can start and then people can still come in
Yeah.
and join us. Okay, great. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Very nice to see you all again. I can recognize some familiar faces and names from the screen, so very nice to see you. As explained the last session, since there are some newcomers, so I repeat the beginning of the session again. So this year, welcome to the continuing professional development course of IFSW. I feel like I'm part of IFSW already by saying this. And this year, IFSW and OSCHR are running this course together to connect social work and social workers, either professionals or practitioners or scholars with the UN human rights mechanisms and the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights. This is a 5-week online course starting last week, and my name is Rin, Human Rights Officer at the OSCHR, especially Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights section. Great to see you all, and especially those who attended last time. And today is the second session, so we will learn about the UN human rights mechanisms and how to use those mechanisms for the benefit of social, social work, but more importantly, the people that we support. So yeah, and I think we can start. Priska, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, last Wednesday, I was at the IFSW headquarters, the office in Rheinfelden, and we had the archive behind me. And this time I'm actually in Lucerne, so that's the canton of Lucerne. It's in Switzerland, one of the 26 cantons that we have. And I'm here because I have a meeting afterwards, and it was a bit tricky to bring my social work practitioner job and then my IFSW role as global commissioner for UN affairs, and then my political role into one. So I could stay here because I'm also a politician in the canton of Lucerne. So it's we always used to say that social work is also a political work, and I'm glad that we have somehow a bit of an inspiration how that can look like. So, Rin, you were looking for the last session, and I also see some people asking for the recordings of the last session. And if you please could also all check your emails. You should have received yesterday an email from the organization committee that has the link for today's session, but also the recording of last session. So please check that, and if you don't have it, I will put it into the chat later on. But just to give you a short overview about what was really interesting from my point of view. So Rin has given us a wonderful speech last time, and she could manage to combine social work understanding and the definition that we have with the economic, social, and cultural rights where she's focusing on. And what was really striking to me is that the 4 key elements that Rin mentioned, that is for fulfilling human rights, we need to have the availability, the accessibility, acceptability, and quality of items. And Rin explained that by housing issues. So if someone is looking for housing, then it has to have a certain availability, accessibility, especially for people with disability and special needs, but also has it to be acceptable, and it has to have a certain quality in order to be acceptable. And Rin also said that we should understand human rights as split into 2 roles. So we have the duty bearers, but also the right holders. And duty bearers are also non-state actors and social workers, and so we have the duty to respect, to protect, and to fulfill human rights through provision, promotion, and facilitation. And what I also like this obligation of states that is for social work really important. So really always keep in mind the obligation that states have, because we use that for our advocacy work. So they have the obligation, you said, Rin, to provide the maximum of available resources, to prohibit retrogressive measures, and to at least provide a minimum core of the core obligation they have by having signed and ratified the Human Rights Declaration. And then at the end, we had a view on social workers that we have different roles that we play. And one is we are, as person, also right holders and duty bearers. We are also enablers of human rights, catalysts for human rights, and human rights defenders. And also Mr. Pradit, who is the head of this department, he said that we are all catalysts for human rights, for change, and found us really motivating also for social work practitioners to see our role is essential. And when we see ourselves as human rights defenders, but also catalysts for change, that has a different meaning for my daily work with clients and the whole community and people are involved. So it's this is the point where we meet the High Commissioner for Human Rights and IFSW, and that's a message I think we want to spread with the more as 5 million social workers who are somehow connected to IFSW through the National Association of Social Workers. So you might know that we have now 153 National Association of Social Workers who are members of IFSW. It's an honor to have this session with Rin and her office, and we have heard last time we have full support, and everyone wants to approach you as social work colleagues. So we're looking forward to have this session. So far, 500 people have subscribed, registered for this event, for these sessions, and we know that most of them will watch the recorded version afterwards, which is really fine. So thank you so much for attending it.
Thank you so much, Priska, for such an excellent summary of last session. And actually, I was thinking, what I should add on to it, but actually nothing. But just one thing I want to highlight is that from the Vasilios presentation last week, and it was really, in a way, very surprised to find how difficult the situations the social workers are in some countries, and then the causes for that difficult situation is not only coming from the political or the security problems, but also coming from this very the neoclassical economy model-based system is also one of the causes that the social workers are facing difficulties in doing their job in a very human rights-based manner. So that was in a way very huge surprise, but at the same time, it's how impressive it was. The social workers are actually faithfully duly delivering their work for the people on the ground. And then the work that Vasilio shared with us, that was very interesting in a way for us to think about how to link those cases with the human rights mechanisms at the national, regional, and global level as well. So that in that sense, I think that today's session is very much related, and then very much important to link that situation with the human rights mechanisms to see how we can improve and better protect the work of social workers and also the social workers themselves as well. Thanks very much. So then maybe we can start today's session with the first presentation with Ms. Wan-Hee Lee, who is sitting next to me. So yes. It was very nice to see Priska and Rory last week sitting together, so that I, replicate the good practice. Yes. So Wan Hee Lee. Oh, well, actually, in the office, we have nothing more to say about, her work in the office. She's been working with the OSHR more than 25 years, dealing with the whole range of economic, social, and cultural rights, as well as civil and political rights at the headquarters in Geneva, but also in many other countries around the world, including Mongolia, Burundi, Bangkok, Cambodia, just to name a few. So she has also worked with the UN human rights mechanisms, in particular the treaty bodies, and she has covered almost all treaty bodies, the committees throughout her career. She is currently the chief of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights section of the Human Rights Treaties branch in OSHR. So without further ado, I will introduce Wan Hee.
Hello, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you and to see the human rights work and social work come together again, breaking out of their silos, because they really are at the heart, very much interrelated. I will go over some of the basics about the human rights system that we'll review a little bit of Rin's presentation for those that didn't hear it, but I will go quickly. So if anybody feels it's too fast, please do make a comment in the chat box and we can always elaborate more. I'll begin with, let's see if we go down here. So, yeah, okay, there we go. Thank you for that very kind introduction. I will draw a little bit here and there from different experiences to see if the abstract part of the presentation can come to life with practical examples. But I have to start with some structural questions, beginning with where does the human rights ecosystem derive from? At essence, it begins with the human rights treaties adopted by the General Assembly that become a part of international human rights law. The treaties are really the foundation, the substantive foundation, the normative basis for all the work that we do, as well as the soft law that supplements it. But I will focus on the main human rights treaties here. You reviewed last week what they're composed of, but suffice it to say, for our purposes today, each of these treaties are monitored by a specific monitoring body, and the names of those bodies will be, I think, apparent as to which treaty body they monitor. There's an body of expert mechanisms, one of which is the treaty bodies that monitor the treaties, the implementation of the treaties by states parties. There is another set of expert mechanisms, which we call the special procedures. These are, you may have heard of special rapporteurs on different themes or in different countries. They're being created by the Human Rights Council, which is a subsidiary body of the General Assembly. It is a long-standing body. It is the successor of the Human Rights Commission, which was established back at the origins of the United Nations itself, and it's just been transformed and upgraded to a council. They have their own team of independent experts, as are the treaty bodies, that will examine human rights in specific countries on specific themes. At the same time, there's a third mechanism, and it's a combination of the three that we will commonly refer to as the human rights mechanisms. It is the treaty body special procedures and this new innovation that was created with the establishment of the Human Rights Council in 2006 of a universal periodic peer review. This is an intergovernmental process where governments review the status, the implementation of human rights in their countries, and they really work in a complementary fashion. There are strengths and weaknesses of each, and all countries are subjected to one or another multiple reviews by these mechanisms. The mechanisms are supported by the Secretariat of OHCHR, and this is what I refer to as the main human rights mechanisms of the United Nations. But I should stress they're not the only ones. There are any number of other bodies that have been established for specific purposes that in a broad sense could also be referred to as the human rights mechanisms that I will not refer to here. There's a whole ILO supervisory bodies. There are special envoys. Some will argue that the UN Security Council should be a human rights mechanism that has human rights responsibilities, but let's focus on these here today. The treaties that you were referred to last week are based on what we call the International Bill of Human Rights, which is composed of this first column here, the Universal Declaration and the two covenants on economic, social, and cultural rights, on civil and political rights. My title is the chief of this section on civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights, and not because we deal with all of the bodies, all of the treaties, the whole mechanisms, but because we support the two covenants. These basic rights established in the covenants are then cut in different ways, sideways, vertically, depending on the focus at the time. With the establishment of the United Nations itself coming out of World War II, stepping into the whole of the discriminatory acts brought to the attention of the UN, emanating from apartheid in South Africa, etc. From early on, racial discrimination was a major focus of the United Nations. And the treaty here actually precedes the two covenants, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. Other treaties addressing specific phenomena followed on torture, on enforced disappearances, and there may be more in the making. The same rights, when cut across a different way with a focus on specific groups, then led to a series of treaties focused on those groups, including women, children, migrant workers, and persons with disabilities. And with the increasing consciousness of human rights around the world, we see many, many more groups finding their voices, mobilizing, and claiming their rights. There is right now efforts underway with considerable support to create a treaty, a specific treaty on the rights of peasants, on the rights of older persons, and these efforts might continue as more and more groups find their voices. So the two covenants are the two main treaties and supplemented by optional protocols. By now, most of the treaties have, either through an optional protocol or through an article of the treaty itself, they have an individual complaints mechanism. And in the case of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, there's also a second optional protocol on the abolition of the death penalty. Individual complaints under the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights came much, much later. There was a large, huge, I think, intellectual debate really as to whether economic, social, and cultural rights could really be the subject of a claim, justiciable in a court with specific remedies. But late into the new millennium, it took that much time for it to be finally decided that yes, it is possible, and that committee is receiving complaints now. The treaties based on specific phenomena are set out here. The one exception to the optional protocols and to the functioning of the treaties is maybe this one in the middle. The Convention Against Torture establishes a committee against torture, but an optional protocol to that convention established another independent body. Actually, it's not subsidiary to the Committee Against Torture. A separate body called the Subcommittee on the Prevention of Torture was established that will complement the work of the Committee Against Torture. And I'll explain that in a bit. And there's the newest treaty body of all is the Committee on Enforced Disappearances, monitoring that convention. The treaties protecting specific groups, women, children, migrant workers, and persons with disabilities, as I mentioned, have among, I think, other than migrant workers and the Convention Against Torture, which are the two newest treaty bodies, all the rest of the treaties have a level of ratification of more than 170 plus states parties around the world. We can really talk about universal ratification of the treaties and speaking about human rights as universal values. In the case of the Convention on the Rights of the Child and persons with disabilities, their ratification record now exceeds 190 states parties, truly, truly universal. In the case of the rights of the child, in fact, the number of states parties exceeds the membership of the United Nations itself. So these are the treaty bodies that monitor the respective conventions. I think the name of the treaty bodies is self-evident, except maybe the Human Rights Committee. And why is that not the Committee on Civil and Political Rights, specific to the contents of the treaty that it monitors? And that is because early on in the development of treaty law, it was conceived of having one treaty on all human rights that effectively would take the Universal Declaration and translate it into binding law. And then for different ideological and substantive reasons, the two covenants, they were split into two, each with their own strong backers in the political sphere, each believing that their sets of rights were more actionable, were more important, or otherwise needed its own treaty. And therefore, we have the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. But the origins was to have one treaty and one treaty body, and that treaty body would have been called the Human Rights Committee. So there's a little bit of historical trivia there. The subcommittee on the prevention of torture I mentioned is a little bit different than the other treaty bodies. The work of the other treaty bodies mainly composed of monitoring how states parties implement the rights under the respective treaties through a process of state reporting and the adoption of conclusions and recommendations thereon. The subcommittee on the prevention of torture acts a little bit differently in that its main work is not that. It is to visit on site to accompany states parties in the development of national machinery for the prevention of torture. So it's a very hands-on, field-oriented treaty body. And finally, the Committee on Enforced Disappearances, highlighted in red here, is a little bit different than the other treaty bodies as well. Although it does the work of the other bodies in monitoring implementation, it also conducts field visits, country visits. It has a procedure of urgent actions by which it accepts cases from victims or victims of enforced disappearances or disappeared. So their representatives, their family members, asking it to take urgent action. And this is specific to this committee because it is the nature of disappearances. The more time it takes to locate that person, the lesser the chances of finding that person safe and alive. And so this procedure was created for that purpose, which is unique to that committee. The treaties, the nature of the treaties are legally binding obligations. But the fact that they're legally binding does not mean that they implement themselves. It's hardly automatic. There's a lot of work that goes behind making these treaties effective and claimable by people. And that is where the advocacy of different groups claiming their rights becomes important. That's where state parties need to be held to their obligations, and it is through repeated, often much repeated, insistence on states parties meeting their rights that we see action happening. But it does happen, and these are the treaties to which they are held. You reviewed last time the threefold responsibility of states parties to respect human rights, that is to refrain from themselves violating human rights. When we see state actors torturing people, that is prima facie a violation of their obligations under the treaty. It's a violation of human rights. They must protect people from violations by a third party. Racial discrimination is a perfect example. There's hardly today, thankfully the world has advanced a great deal. There's hardly today states where there is a legitimate, legally permissible racial discrimination. It is prohibited most everywhere, but it happens nevertheless between private parties. There is an obligation of the state, even if it is not itself committing racial discrimination, to prevent racial discrimination from happening among private individuals or organizations. And there is a third obligation to fulfill human rights. That is, even if it's not itself violating, even if it's not itself responsible for the provision of a particular right, it has an obligation to create the conditions by which that right is fulfilled. Adequate housing is an example of that. Most countries everywhere will depend on the market to provide housing for the people. But there is always a certain level of the population that is not able to provide for themselves under the normal conditions that most of the general population can. And there the state has specific obligations to take actions to care for them. And there is where the work of social workers becomes extremely important. The same, what I just presented to you in a schematic way is these are the treaties up top. These are the treaty bodies created by these treaties below, and the different optional protocols that apply to the treaties. I should highlight here, because these are separate treaties, each with their own group of states parties. It is only the states parties that can bring about amendments to the treaties, bring about changes. Even if the UN were to close tomorrow for whatever reason, it would. The member states decided that it's not worth continuing the UN, the treaties would remain in force. And the treaty, and the obligations under the treaties would remain in force. So this is a difference between treaty-based mechanisms and the charter-based mechanisms that are established by resolution of the Council of the General Assembly. The General Assembly or the Human Rights Council can establish a mechanism, a special rapporteur today. It can abolish it tomorrow. It cannot do that with the treaty bodies. And so this is a precious tool that I would encourage, being made full use of. The treaty bodies have a mandate to monitor the implementation of their respective treaties. They're composed by independent experts. They are nominated by states, but they do not serve in a capacity of representative of those states. They serve in their own individual capacities. The numbers of them vary from treaty body to treaty body. There are 172 members in total, so quite a force in their own right, representative of all regions, of most legal systems, of most cultures, religions, and they bring really a rich richness to the understanding of the universality of human rights. They are non-remunerated. They serve solely in their personal capacity, pro bono, at the service of the UN. And they conduct most of the work, except for the Subcommittee on the Prevention of Torture. Most of the work is conducted here in Geneva in annual sessions. Turning to the Human Rights Council. Now, this is an intergovernmental body, distinguishable from the expert bodies. This is, by its nature, it is a reflection of international relations, how states relate to each other. It is composed of 47 member states serviced by OHCHR. They have now about 3 sessions per year, but a number of special sessions throughout the year, working to respond to emergencies, to prevent human rights abuses, They are an international forum for human rights dialogues. The principal human rights NGOs and actors, as well as those responsible for human rights in the governments of the world, will meet here in Geneva for the sessions of the Human Rights Council. They may recommend developments in human rights law. They may recommend a new treaty, new studies, and as I mentioned, they conduct universal periodic reviews. So it's peer on peer, governments reviewing other governments with all that entails. Politicization, yes, but also it is, there are those that would wish an intergovernmental peer review process to be more in-depth than it is. And I would say, having seen the impact of the UPR around the world, yes, one can hope for more. You will not get the same level of in-depth analysis that you get from the expert bodies just by its nature. However, the fact that it is a peer review system, the fact that this is how other countries see human rights in our country carries significant weight and should be fully utilized toward that end. There is a media attention that is unparalleled since the establishment of the UPR. The better fed with information, the better recommendations come out of the mechanisms, and that applies to all of them. The Universal Periodic Review system is based on a cycle of 4.5 years. There are 3 recognized inputs into the UPR, and that is the national reports from the state party under consideration, a compilation report of information from UN experts and bodies, therefore treaty bodies, therefore special procedures, ILO, and other review mechanisms will be compiled, plus a review of compilation of information from other stakeholders and NGOs, national human rights institutions, and why not the Federation of Social Workers. There is a place for information to be received and considered. And the result of that will be a report with recommendations. The uniqueness of UPR, unlike other review systems, is that it gives the state party under review a chance to accept or not the recommendation made to it. And once it's accepted a certain recommendation, that gives us then a hook, a way to come back to the state party as often as needed to say, how are you implementing this recommendation? Other review processes don't allow for acceptance or rejection of recommendations, and therefore that hook will be different. But here it is explicit. When a state party accepts a recommendation, it is expected to implement it. And then it will be asked about that 4.5 years later. The special procedures of the Human Rights Council. While the Human Rights Council is an intergovernmental body, their special procedures are independent experts. And today, there are some 60 special procedures, 46 thematic, 14 relating to specific countries or territories. The special procedures that relate to countries or territories will visit the countries that they review. For the most part, they have a provision for 2 or so visits per year. And when they come to a country, they will meet with the human rights community in that country. It is entirely possible, if the need is felt, for social workers, organizations in the country to request a meeting with special rapporteurs. Bring your concerns to the special rapporteurs and make them understand if something needs to be changed or improved with respect to the issues under their responsibilities. They're appointed by the Human Rights Council, normally for a set term, 2, 4, 6 years, normally 6 years. They will monitor human rights in different countries or in specific issues. And you will find, I'll show you later in the presentation, where you can find the list of those thematic mandates. They receive and consider direct complaints. I mentioned that the treaty bodies also have a complaints mechanisms, and theirs are quasi-judicial. They will receive a complaint and they will ask the state party and the author more and more information until they are satisfied that they have all the information necessary to reach a conclusion. And that process may take years. Special rapporteurs are more, I would say, a lightning strike force. They're the firefighters. They don't have the same threshold for receiving complaints that the treaty bodies may have, and they have more liberty to react quicker. Most special rapporteurs are a single individual. They don't have to confer with 10 or 20 other experts to arrive at a conclusion. But their conclusions are then not considered to be quasi-judicial. It is of a different nature. But they're there. All special rapporteurs receive and consider direct complaints. They will ask the states parties about the nature of this complaint and will engage in an interaction until they are satisfied that the complaint has been resolved. They appeal to governments, they can respond to emergencies, and they're subsidiary to the council. So their main reporting obligation is to the Human Rights Council. Now, I'd like to end here with taking up one of the points, so an important point left by Rin at her presentation of the relevance of human rights to social workers and how social workers can use the mechanisms to promote the work that they're doing and improve upon it. There are human rights for social workers are relevant for social workers as rights holders, as duty bearers, as enablers of human rights, as catalysts for human rights, and as human rights defenders themselves. Now, as rights holders, social workers are, of course, human beings like the rest of the human beings on earth. All of the treaties apply to social workers. Social workers have all the civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights as anyone else. Know your rights, get to know the treaties, claim your rights, and find out who is responsible. If you are a rights holder, somebody must be responsible for fulfilling that right for you. So understand the mechanisms behind it and claim your rights from them. Social workers are workers. All the labor rights, there's under the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the right to just and favorable conditions of work. That belong to social workers as well as to all other workers. Safety at work, just remuneration, equal pay for equal work, apply to social workers like they apply to anyone else. And then there are social workers as part of those different groups in focus that special treaties have been established for. The Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women apply to women social workers, migrant workers. If you're foreign workers in the country in which you serve, then the Convention on the Rights of Migrant Workers apply to you. The Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination for those social workers that belong to different racial groups will apply to you. Get to know your rights and get to know the mechanisms. And for the complaints mechanism, the complaints procedures that I refer to, either under the treaty bodies or under the special rapporteurs, they are accessible to you as well. Learn how to submit complaints if you feel a need, and see your complaints dealt with there. Social workers are duty bearers. All of the rights that are provided for under the treaties have to be provided for in some way by the duty bearers. For the treaties, the main dynamic, the main relationship is between the state as a duty bearer and the people as a rights holders. And social workers are being part of the state infrastructure that is obliged to provide for the persons in need under your cares. It's helpful to know, what services are due to them, what they are entitled to. Get to know the rights for yourselves, but also for the beneficiaries, and of course, the duty to respect and fulfill them then apply to social workers. If the social services regime is inadequate, here, for those that are closest to the most vulnerable people in society, amassing that information and bringing it together in a way that is actionable, in a way that you can advocate for, is something that is entirely doable. And you've got then the mechanisms that are ready to receive that information, advocate for change, so that the state can fulfill its responsibilities. And you can do that if you need help, support for pressing for some of these changes. These mechanisms, the human rights mechanisms, are there to listen. I put here in red an example of a type of recommendation that is made by the treaty bodies. In the case of CEDAW, the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, they recently recommended to France that it supports services for women and women victims of child and or forced marriage, as well as polygamy, and to train social workers and police officers on gender-sensitive protocols for dealing with victims. They received information that that training was inadequate. But how would they know that? They need to hear from those affected. Make use of the mechanism. They can help you to advocate for those changes and to be able to fulfill your duties as duty bearers better. Social workers as enablers of human rights, many of the rights, in fact, many of the economic, social, and cultural rights, but also civil and political rights, would not be accessible to those who are most vulnerable on their own. Many of them will need help. And I'll highlight here, especially the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities will have any number of issues. In some countries, the review of the state parties was on how to help persons with disabilities vote. They have a right to vote on equal par as anyone else, but they need help in order to exercise that. They may need help to be able to express their free will and their decisions. Being closest to the beneficiaries of social work, social workers will be those able to alert the authorities on possible violations that may come across, to be alert to where discrimination or violence occurs, and to propose actions in that regard. CEDAW has been consistently recommending training of social workers and empowering them to act on cases of domestic violence, for example. Social workers can be a source of information to beneficiaries about their rights and entitlements to help them navigate the system. When I served as the head of office in Cambodia, we found that, in fact, there were many social programs we advocated for, but there were actually a quite good number of programs that were there that people simply did not know about. It may be due to just lack of knowledge of state apparatus. It may be due to illiteracy. There are indigenous people that live in such remote areas that unless the information is brought to them, they will never know on their own. And so simply being able to help them bridge that information gap to serve as their guides in a system that may not be perfect, but actually better than we realize, could go a long way in enabling them to reach their rights. Help the state in its obligations to respect, protect, and fulfill its obligations in these ways, because social workers are the eyes and ears of the state before the most vulnerable parts of society. Social workers can be catalysts for human rights. Where you see the inadequacies, you can be the first to study it, to analyze it, and to propose the changes. If you know what the human rights are, then you know what to aim for. I'll say, for example, the Committee on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights adopted in 2008 what it calls a general comment on Social Security. General comments are those comments that are not specific to a particular country, but where they see many states parties needing guidance on specific rights or specific issues. These are texts that they adopt. And this general comment on Social Security outlines 8 different categories of Social Security that it believes is fundamental, that need to be established, if not already established, in states parties across the world on healthcare, sickness, old age, unemployment, etc. Know them and look in your own countries. Is that Social Security provided? Is it accessible? And if not, what needs to be done in order to establish an adequate Social Security system in your country? You can use the work of the treaty bodies in this way for advocacy, to propose new laws, policies, programs, budget, strengthening of the budget, and any other number of ways that you're, I'm sure, very well aware of, to strengthen accountability of the states in which you work, but also the social work regime globally. And if you find it useful, you may submit information to the UN mechanisms so that, like CEDAW, like these other examples that I cited, they can issue relevant recommendations. And finally, social workers as human rights defenders. There's no question that the important work that social workers do makes it essential work for all of your beneficiaries to be able to exercise their rights. Defending the rights of others is precisely the work of human rights defenders. And as such, the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders is applicable, I believe, without question, to social workers as well. So whenever you find yourself under threat, under risk, under attack because of your work, turn to the declaration, turn to the treaties, and turn to the mechanisms. I'd like to finish by inviting you to visit our website, and I will show you how to access this information. Now, it would be a whole other presentation itself to speak about, pragmatically, mechanism by mechanism, how to access them. But here, if you turn to instruments and mechanisms on our homepage, you can get more information about each of these mechanisms and more.
Wait, Mrs. Lee, if I may interrupt briefly. Do the other ones see like your screen shared? Or I think I see you, I don't see your screen shared.
You don't see the screen shared.
Oh, because we are sharing the screen.
Is it working? Is it for the other ones? Can someone give me a sign, thumbs up? Do you see the screen shared? Obviously. Okay, good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry
Okay.
for the interruption, but then it's all good.
All right. No, thank you. I will just invite you here to take a look at these pages on the mechanisms, instruments and mechanisms. And here you will see a bit about the structure that I presented, the special procedures, the treaty bodies, etc. And those that are interested in submitting a complaint can turn here. There are forms, there are criteria, and there is a, let me show you this comparison table so that you can see whether one or another complaints procedure is maybe better suited to your situation. I'll invite you all to take a good look through the treaties themselves and become familiar with the content, as well as looking at the schedule of reviews, the country reviews by the treaty bodies. When your country is up for a review, there's your opportunity to submit information to that body, and you will see for each, normally there should be a detailed guidance notes with deadlines and practical information about the submission of information. So with that, I'm at the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening to all of this.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lee. And if I may raise a question to you right now, and then we turn to Jane afterwards, so Jane can get ready. But we have in the chat a few questions, and it's related to CEDAW. And the question is, in addition, this raised question, how we know if our own organization, association, and IFSW comply with the treaties? Do we know we are do we know we are non-discriminatory, gender sensitive, and inclusive enough according to treaties?
The analysis of whether an organization is compliant with the treaties is, I think it requires a self-analysis, unless there is a mandated body to do that, unless you engage a body to do that. The obligations are on the state, I should emphasize. And the organization, being part of the state, can certainly recommend to the state that such an analysis be undertaken. Are the services being provided on a non-discriminatory basis? Is the staffing, are social workers being recruited on a non-discriminatory basis? So it's hard to have another body examine that, especially the treaty bodies that are so far away, unless that information is brought to them. So I think it's important to initiate that kind of review, and then the treaty bodies would be certainly happy to receive that, and then to review and make recommendations based on that.
Thank you. I also know that you have this newsletter where you share always questionnaires that people can really also submit their position, and I think that would be also an option to contribute and share a view from social work practitioners to certain topics that OHCHRs focus on. Another question that we have in the chat is, how do we know about the country visits from the special rapporteurs? And some of them, they haven't seen how you share the website. You might just put the link for the website in the chat. But then is there, just for those who attend, is there a list of country visits, and how can we invite those special rapporteurs? Is it just by writing an email? Hey, we're a social work association or so. We are working in this field, and we would like to invite the special rapporteur to visit our program. How would that be?
Okay, with that relates to OHCHR itself. All of the special rapporteurs have an assistant. On the website, you should be able to find the generic email address of each of the special rapporteurs. So you can contact them through there. On the country rapporteurs, you can ask them the next time you visit the country, we would like to have a meeting with you. And then they will see with the rapporteur and respond to that. On the thematic rapporteurs, they also undertake country visits, but obviously they're global reach, so they're not going to be going to every country every year. Again, they should have a generic email address, and so you can suggest to them that they be in touch with you if they visit the country. But even if they don't, because their reports are global, they can always receive information, and if they find it relevant, they can always reflect on it in their annual reports. So it doesn't necessarily need a country visit in order for you to establish contact with the special rapporteurs. For the treaty bodies, the country reviews is also available on our website. There's session pages where most of the treaty bodies try to publish at least 1 or 2 sessions in advance. So about 6 to 9 months in advance, the countries that are up for review.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. And it's a wonderful link also to Rin's presentation. You expanded on words that Rin already mentioned, the availability, the accessibility, but also acceptability, but also seeing the different roles of the duties that we have, and also the roles that social workers are facing. And that was really deepening the presentation that we already had. I assume for many social workers, it's it's still something you need to hear from OHCHR, that we are also understood as being the eyes and ears of a state. So that's quite a meaningful task that we have, and it's good to have this combination with OHCHR, but also having national level approaches that it's much of it is goes through national mechanism. And this is also where we see the national associations as an important organization to approach. And one of IFSW's main goal is really to strengthen the national association in order to have kind of a national body that is working with professional social worker and expanding the knowledge. So it comes from within the profession, the understanding that we have, besides of all the impacts that we get from outside, but also having kind of a deliberated and strong social work perspective. So that's part of IFSW understanding, and I'm glad to hear the support you also give for professional social work and the importance to fulfill our obligation as study bearers. Thank you.
Can I add just one more thing? OHCHR, as a secretariat, I didn't speak much about this, but we have now some 91 field presences across the world, regional and national, in various compositions. And if there is an OHCHR office in your country, that would be a very good first level of contact through them to be able to access the various human rights mechanisms.
Okay, and this will probably the link where we have our global organization coming together and working with the National Association in the National Office of OHCHR. And remember that we, Rina and me and also others, have been speaking about, having kind of role model or starting a project on national level with colleagues. That would be really good also to bring then this narrative to a global level back and say this, having kind of national approaches and networks that include social work. It's not only social work, of course, but human rights activists and workers. So having this national network would be really important for also the global voice in order to advocate for other and support other nations to build up something like this. Okay, thank you so much. Rin, are you fine, or do you need anything to add from your side?
No, nothing much. And I think that thank you so much once again to Wanhee for the wonderful and brilliant presentation. And actually, by just listening to her, I also deepened my understanding of the mechanisms further. So that was very helpful. And then, in addition to the information provided, definitely the webpage that Wanhee shared on the last slide of her presentation, and I think that contains most of the information that you may need in terms of engagement with the international human rights mechanisms. And then just one thing that our office is regularly sending the CSO, civil society organizations newsletters every week. So that contains all the information about the UN mechanisms, so that how you can engage with the procedures. So that I will share with you, how to subscribe these newsletters so that those who are interested in already engaging with the UN mechanisms, and I think that is a useful source of information as well. Thanks. Over to you, Priska.
Wonderful. Oh yeah, I assume the attendees will love to have this link and get this information. That's one of my favorite newsletters. It's really contentful. So we pass over to Jane Shears, and if you can turn on your microphone and if we briefly check if it works. Jane, can you hear me well? And okay, I'm not hearing you. Oh. Okay. If you have another device, like smartphone or something to use, Jane, maybe that sometimes that helps. Try it again. You just speak, Jane, whenever you want. I'm giving a short introduction, and then you have sent me the presentation, and I will share my screen so that you can prepare that. So we have Jane. She is with us, and in every session we have also someone from IFSW with us, and every person has a leading role in one of the commissions. So IFSW has now 4, but is building up a 5th global commission. And so with this commission, we support the global board in various topics. So Jane is leading the ethics commission, so she's the global ethics commissioner. With that, she has a global team, and they work on ethical issues and how social work works with the code of ethics that we have. But besides that, as we all do that as volunteers, Jane is head with the British Association of Social Workers, where she is the head of professional development and education. And she will give us some information of this understanding of social work and ethical values. Jane, let's try again if it works.
Just checking, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Perfect.
Good. That's my starting presentation. Huh?
Thank you very much for inviting me here today. And I'd just like to thank Wan Hei for such a comprehensive presentation on the mechanisms, but also how they relate directly to social work practice. And I'm going to follow on in this session. I'm going to cover briefly, if you could start the slideshow, just a little bit about the IFSW Ethics Commission. But whilst we're going along, I'm really keen for you to use the chat function to share some examples about when you've practiced ethically, or where you may have come across something that you felt wasn't as ethical as it should be, and any kind of activism or any ways that you've challenged that you can share with us as we go through the presentation. I'm also going to share an example which is actually based on the treaty body, the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So we've got an actual example based on some work that was done in the UK, which involved the human rights of an individual that then went on to change our legal framework. So as Priska says, my name's Jane Shears. I'm based in the United Kingdom. I'm here today as IFSW Ethics Commissioner, but all my practice experience for nearly all the time I've been a social worker has been in mental health, social inclusion, and recovery. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Are we able to show the slideshow?
What's that? Is it correct or not? This is this one.
Can we just move to the next slide, please?
Yeah, this one.
It's the one that says IFSW, the Ethics Commission and Code of Ethics. I don't see the slideshow moving.
Oh, okay. Yes. I see it. How is it for the other ones? Do they see that is working, or Rin, do you see this slide? Or do we have a technical problem?
Well, actually, I think we can see the slide, but only the first slides of the presentation.
Okay.
And then, yeah, it's gone now.
Turn it on again.
So I'll carry on. The IFSW Ethics Commission is set up in a very similar way to the other commissions. So there will be a global commissioner And then there are regional commissioners. I'm really, really pleased that we have on the call the regional commissioner for Europe, Gabriella Stark-Angermeyer, and also we have Sukrita Ray, who is one of the regional ethics commissioner representatives in the Asia Pacific region. So you'll know that the IFSW produced the updated statement of ethical principles, and they are available on the IFSW website. If you look under the Ethics Commission tab, you'll see those statements of ethical principles. And also you may be aware that on that website as well, you would see your country's code of ethics. Every member of IFSW has to submit a code of ethics, which the Ethics Commission has a duty to almost quality assure. And one of the roles we have is to look at the applications for any new member wanting to join IFSW. Over the last 3 to 4 years, we've had 5 new members join. One of the other roles that the Ethics Commission delivers on is disseminating information, presenting at conferences, doing webinars like this, and also we are just about to embark on a project which is about the social workers' views in terms of the ethical considerations around the use of artificial intelligence in social work practice going forward. Although we do have the ethical codes, the codes tend to reflect kind of universalism, and so social workers may at times need to be able to adopt a more relativist and contextual approach depending on the situation that they find themselves in. I'm sorry that we don't have the slides moving, but I'm now moving on to slide 3, which is about the key themes. And this comes from some work carried out by Sarah Banks, who is a professor at the University of Durham. And she themes the key principles of ethics in 4 ways. One is about conduct, which is as social workers, what actions we regard as right or wrong. Character, what moral qualities are regarded as good or bad. Relationships, what responsibilities do we have to each other in our relationships with people we're working with. And then society, which is linked very much back to the purpose of these CPD sessions, which is much more about the responsibility of the society that we want to be living in. Thanks, Priska. So I just really wanted to summarise that by saying that social workers' ability and commitment to act ethically is an essential aspect of the quality of the service that we offer to people who engage with social workers. And our respect for human rights and a commitment to promoting social justice are at the core of social work throughout the world. And as I've said, I'm really keen to hear about examples from all our participants here today. So if we can just go to the next slide so we can recap on human rights. The social work is generally based on the inherent worth and dignity of all people as expressed in the United Nations. And we've heard a lot about that in the first session and as we go through these next sessions. But I just wanted to qualify that human rights are divided into 3 classes. Fundamental, absolute, qualified and procedural. And sometimes we don't always split out these different kinds of qualities to the human rights that underpin all our social work practice. So fundamental and absolute rights, as it says, they can't be interfered with at all, and there's such rights as freedom from torture, inhumane treatment, or punishment. Then we have qualified rights, and they may be limited for various reasons, as long as the article test is met. And they could be to do with interfering with people's rights, prevention of crime, protection of health, and the rights and freedoms of others. And the right to liberty is a procedural right, and that may be limited, but only on the grounds explicit in the article itself. And those grounds are that someone has committed an imprisonable offence, or on the grounds that an individual is of unsound mind. So moving on to the next slide, we're going to look at a specific example that involves the breach of someone's Article 5 rights on the basis of an unsound mind. And in this case, we're talking about someone who doesn't have capacity to make decisions for themselves about their care and treatment options. So this was a case that came to the European Court of Human Rights, and it regarded a man, HL, who was an autistic man with a learning disability and lived with carers in what we call an adult placement home, but, you know, a family home in the community. And he lacked capacity to agree to a hospital admission. So what happened was he was admitted to a psychiatric hospital, and I've put Bournemouth there because if any of you want to look this up further, if you look at the Bournemouth ruling, you'll be able to get more details around this particular situation. And he was admitted because it was felt that it was under his best interest that he needed to be in hospital. However, his carers challenged this decision, and they said that it was unethical to have a detention in hospital without any legal framework. Now, I'm fast tracking this case. It went on for quite a long time, but essentially the European Court of Human Rights agreed that this man had had his Article 5 rights to liberty, freedom, rights breached. And what happened eventually in England and Wales is that our Mental Capacity Act was amended to include something called deprivation of liberty safeguards, that this was a framework around safeguarding when someone's liberty was deprived, and particularly if that person didn't have capacity to agree to that deprivation. However, what we found was that despite many people living in residential care or in other inpatient facilities without the capacity to agree to that placement, their safeguards weren't independently being assessed, which led to a thinking around what does a deprivation of liberty actually mean? If somebody seems to be happy in a care home or they're not actively resisting being there, can they be deprived of their liberty? So this brings us to the Article 12 of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which was that everybody has an equal right to be treated equally under the law. And this led to a very famous case, which is P versus Cheshire West, that was heard in the Supreme Court. And again, to fast track to the outcome, the court heard the evidence, and there was a famous quote which said, "A gilded cage is still a cage," meaning that if people are still deprived of their liberty, however nice the surroundings or however happy they seem to be, that they are still deprived of their liberty. And this led to something called the acid test, which is that a person is under continuous supervision and not free to leave. So if we move to the next slide, please. So I've seen in the chat, thank you, Bridget Penhale has put a comment in, really. So we did some recent research. So just to be clear, and again, if you've got assessment frameworks of your own that you'd like to share with us in the chat, please do put it in. But just very briefly, a capacity assessment, the decision has to be specific and time specific. So in many of the assessments that we do around people's capacity, we're really wondering whether they have capacity to agree to the care and treatment plan that they're experiencing. And the assessment has two main parts to it. One is called the functional test, and one is called the diagnostic test. And they have particular, so what is the person's diagnosis? Can they understand the information? Can they retain the information? Can they use or weigh the information to make the decision? And can they communicate it? So an example I've used here before is that if I have a headache and I take a paracetamol, I will understand that the paracetamol will help to soothe my headache. Now, that's probably all I need to know. I don't need to know all the biochemical reactions that will bring about the relief of the pain. So the test is really quite, the threshold is quite low. It's just about the person understand the salient points in which to make that decision. So moving on, please, to the next slide. So the person who is often making the best interest decision is called a best interest assessor. And in England and Wales, this will most likely be a person who has trained as a social worker and has postgraduate training. And we did a survey of 4 local authorities' reports of a best interest assessment and found that the ages that people were being deprived of their liberty ranged in the sample between the ages of 30 and 97. The younger age group were more likely to be people with a learning disability. The older age group were likely to be people with some kind of dementia, might be Alzheimer's, Lewy body, other sorts of dementia. And the middle age group, which is perhaps a bit more worrying, were people who were most likely to be experiencing alcohol-induced dementia. And we looked at the deprivations of liberty. So what restraints were people under? We found that 33% there was an environmental constraint or restraint, which was things like locked doors, keypads that people couldn't exit from. Physical restraints might be that somebody had a 2-to-1 observation, or they used a wheelchair, or they had a lap belt, something along those lines. Mechanical would be that people might have needed to have had a hoist to transfer them from a chair to a bed, those sorts of things. And in 27%, we found that people had a chemical restraint. Now, the rationale for the different restraints being used in environmental, physical and mechanical, they were genuinely felt to be in the person's best interests in terms of their safety and safeguarding, so that people wouldn't be able to wander outside the door, or that people would be able to move around, but with some kind of support, wheelchairs, Zimmer frame, those sorts of things. But what we did find is that chemical restraint were most likely to be used for inducing sedation, reducing agitation, and in almost half the sample we looked at, the chemical medication was being given covertly, which means the person didn't know that they were being given that medication. So there were, obviously that's an ethical issue around how that is managed and how that's recorded. On the next slide, if we can move to there, please. We'll also see that the date from referral to assessment within the legal timescales is due to be 21 days maximum. What we actually found in the sample was that the quickest assessment was in 10 days, and that was for somebody who was on a medical acute ward with experiencing delirium. But actually that some people were waiting months before their deprivation of liberty was assessed. So there are considerable concerns about the implementation of the Act. So we've gone from, you know, the European Court of Human Rights talking about the Bournemouth scenario to going back almost in a circle to us being still with lots of people being deprived of their liberty without a legal framework. And just what I've put there, really, that it's really it's really important for all of us to continually use critical reflection in and on our practice throughout our career. So we know that we know that there is a problem with how social workers and others are implementing the deprivation of liberty safeguards, and that's something that we have a duty to bring to the attention of, you know, our employers and our professional organisations and bodies. So if we can move on, please. So just revisiting social work ethics, the human rights relate to the fundamental entitlements of people with respect to upholding social justice. And we've just had an example where good intention hasn't really translated into best practice. But ethics are more concerned with social workers' conduct and decision-making in their implementation. And sometimes when we're confronted with social injustice, ethical considerations come into play. And then we're needing to think about what are the right decisions that we need to make. And I just wanted to raise here the issue around the concept of moral distress, that sometimes we make decisions when actually really no decision is the best one. And that might be around the allocation of resources. But we have to make a decision as best we can with these circumstances that we have. And at the end of the presentation, I'll talk about a framework that can help us do that. I also think it's important that although the international definition of social work doesn't mention specifically around social control, we are often in a position where we balance social control between rights-based relational practice. And I just wanted to come on to the next slide, please, which perhaps helps us look at this in a slightly different way. So this is a version or based on the ladder of participation created by Sherry Arnstein in 1969. And I think one of the so the ladder of participation goes actually upwards from doing two. So doing two are going to be things like we do two people in terms of depriving them of their liberty or admitting them to hospital against their will. And that is very much a kind of protection that might be for the protection of the person or for the protection of others. Doing four is more paternalistic. It's about doing things for people. And although that might be consulting them in what we're doing, we still do the activity on behalf of somebody else. Doing with is far much more around working in partnership. So it's how we do things together. On the next slide, we're going to talk about shared decision making. But more and more, I think, as we go through emancipatory practice and participative ways of working with people, there's a lot more about doing by. So in some places that we'll find that service user teams are working together to deliver peer support, for example. That might be in universities, it might be in social services, it might be in a whole range of provider organisations that deliver social services. And it would be really interesting, again, if you've got some examples you can share where we have doing by experts by experience, working with other experts by experience. I just wanted to mention the concept of cultural humility with this slide, because we have a duty to really learn from experts by experience about their own lives, that we need to learn from them and work with experts by experience about their own life experience. But we also need to make a commitment to continually exploring our own cultural identities, including how society has valued them, how we internalize those values. And I think it's really important that we all recognize that we may have, or we will have, some unconscious bias, and we all operate at some level at unconscious incompetence, which means that there are some things we just don't know, and we have to accept that we don't know. And we are better able to be social workers by inviting those honest and truthful, transparent conversations with people we work with to help us explore their own story and their own meaning of their own narratives in their life. So if we come on to the next slide, please. So I think there is an empirical ethical imperative to share decisions with people. And there's something called the Salzburg Statement that you might be interested in, which is that we don't make the decisions about how much we think somebody will understand what we're saying, that we actually have a duty to work with people and try and explain the decisions that are affecting our work and their preferences. And we should always have a two-way conversation and work with people so they can explain their circumstances and express their preferences. And one of the key areas that we have now in our mental capacity legislation is something called advanced decisions, where when we have capacity, we can write down and have it witnessed about not wishing to have life-sustaining treatments if we get to a point where that may be necessary. So actually we can have quite a lot of power in deciding our own futures within some of the legislative frameworks that we have. And I think by paying attention to individuals' informed preferences, we can inform them to achieve the outcomes that they want. And I've just put in there about the disability rights, no decision about us without us, which I think is still very relevant today. So just moving on to the last slide, I am aware we're going over a very small amount, but I will end quickly. So we've heard about the Committee on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and these are some of the principles that you can look back on. But I just wanted to mention something that actually Wan Hei mentioned earlier, if we move to the next slide, which is something called Promote the Vote. And it is a campaign that's happening in more places about recognising that people with learning disabilities have a right as a citizen to vote. And this links back to the CRPD Article 29, the right to participate in political and public life. And I've put a link there to a publication, which is a practitioner guide to how to work with people to enable people to vote and exercise their voting rights if they have a learning disability, where they choose to do so. And obviously this is a very important year in 2024 in the UK for people having that citizenship and right to vote, as it is obviously elsewhere across the world. So that brings me to the next slide, which is just a framework that was developed to help support you in your thinking around what makes good ethical decisions. And the framework was developed from some work we did from a global survey in IFSW in partnership with the Social Work Ethics Research Group. And it really talks about thinking about the ethical vigilance. So think around the issues, use your critical skills, don't jump straight to what's in someone's best interests without thinking through the layers of complexity and all the circumstances around the issues that you're needing to make a decision about. Then use your ethical reasoning, balance the decisions around different needs, rights, responsibilities, and risks. And I would probably add there also people's strengths. Often we look at how to make decisions when we minimize risk, but actually risk-taking practice can be very much at the heart of good social work practice. And then lastly, the logistics around how to strategically and practically bring about those decisions in the best interests for the person with whom we're making them. So just to my last slide then, this comes from a book called Social Work, Cats and Rocket Science, which is about social work with adults. And it says, social work is not about looking down a deep hole at someone, turning on a spotlight and inviting the paparazzi around to film the drama as it unfolds. Better social work practice is about getting into the hole with the person, giving them a leg up, so wherever possible, they can scramble out of it. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jane, for this really amazing presentation. And we had a question from one person just when you began that is really global level that we're speaking of, and I felt that your presentation bridged that, you know, from a global perspective, global values that we share within IFSW. But really practice oriented, so that there are elements in there that I see, I can take that with me as practitioner, and I hope our colleagues feel the same. So we have a Calista Juliastuti who wrote that, and I invite you, Calista, if you have a final question or something to say to Jane. We won't have a long time for a Q&A, but I want to give you the floor if you have the opportunity to open your microphone. How is that, Calista?
Let's wait 1 second.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that was short, but I couldn't really understand. Would you like to try again to say something, or how's that?
Maybe, Priska, we can answer the question about how to be a volunteer for IFSW in our country.
Yes.
So each region in IFSW is made up of a group of members. So I would probably suggest you perhaps start working through your member organisation. You might have an international committee or something like that, where you can start to get involved in international work. And I know the UN Commission has quite a network of volunteers across the different regions, but the commissions are all set up slightly differently. And I do urge you that if you're interested in human rights, to come to the next presentation where we have Rose Henderson, who's talking about the Human Rights Commission. And that would be a really great question to think about, is setting up a new commission. I don't want to steal Rose's thunder. I know she's on the call, but just to explain how that commission is going to work and what its priorities are going to be. So I would suggest, yes, come along next time.
Yeah, wonderful. I had with Bobby had a separate chat and invited him also to share a case.
Perfect.
Next week we are going to say to have group works, and so that all of you who participate can really share practical experience, but also link that to all that what you have presented, Jane, but also the presentation from the UN OHCHR. So trying to really bridge this global and local level. Jane, again, thank you very much for contributing. Speaking about values is always so much contemptful for showing the value that social work has, and also not having the outcome presented, but rather having the mechanism and how to get there, and really involving people in decision making, in empowerment, and that is part of the fantastic work that we have as social workers everywhere. So, and I always hope people have the time to really get through those ethical questions as well. And also hope they have national association and have this really strong network in bringing professionals together so that they can share their understanding and also learn from each other. Also, another warm thanks to Mrs. Lee for her wonderful presentation, being part of this session. I think we all could really learn a lot, and luckily we record the session, so all who couldn't attend it, they can watch it afterwards. I think Rain, should we send it again next week to all those 500 people, so they have like all the recordings?
Okay, thank you very much, Priska, and many thanks to both Wan-hee and Jane for for your fantastic the presentations and then the questions and comments provided by the participants. And I think that the more we progress, we process with the session, and I think that our understanding is going deeper and wider. So that is fantastic, and then the participation is more active. So very happy and grateful to all of you. Just for some brief announcement for the next session. The next session will be the same on Wednesday morning at the same time through the Zoom link. And then as Priska mentioned, that the recording of this session and the previous session will be available to you. And we understand that there was some technical issues to receive the emails with the recordings. So if you have any problems, please try to contact us to let us know so that we can sort out the problems and that make sure that you have the recordings of both sessions. So the next session will be on the 8th of May at the same time. And then as Jen also mentioned, that Ms. Rose Henderson from IFSW will make a short presentation about this new commission. And then the next session, we will have some in-depth discussion in group and in plenary so that how we put the knowledge and experience in practice so that we are hoping to come up with some the action points to take after this session at the individual level or national level or the global level at with the IFSW. So yeah, so please come again next week, and then see you next week. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Rain. Thank you all. Have a wonderful time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.